Hi, this is Trash Dev. I'm Tapioca. This is episode 3 of my series about developing Lakeside, a fishing adventure RPG. In the last episode, I made an editor program for creating new fish and organizing them into tables so they could be assigned to tiles in-game. Where we left off, water tiles can now actually have fish assigned to them, but the gameplay for catching the fish still doesn't exist. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the fishing gameplay, explain why I've designed it the way I have, and work on the actual coding. We're going to be talking about game design in this episode, so I want to stress that everything I'm about to say is my own opinion. Good game design is a subjective thing that everyone has their own take on, and my take is no more right or wrong than yours or anyone else's. Everyone's feelings about games are going to be informed by what they've played before and the context they played it in, and if you disagree with something I'm about to say, that's totally fine. Alright, with the disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. Over the years, games have implemented all kinds of different systems for fishing. Most more serious fishing games go with a sort of boredom simulator approach, where you cast the line and then sit there hoping for something to bite. If you're lucky, you might get an underwater cam that shows if there's any fish interested in the hook, but that can lead to even more frustration, as you watch the fish you want to catch simply refuse to take the bait. I'm going to avoid making a boredom simulator, because the enjoyable quality of doing nothing in real fishing doesn't translate well to video games. In my experience, a lot of creativity in this space comes from games that implement fishing as a minigame. If you remember my first attempt at Lakeside from 2016 that I mentioned back in episode 1, what I wanted there was meant to be reminiscent of the fishing from Link's Awakening, which is a more active approach. You could have a lot of depth in a system like this, so there's some promise, but I've decided against it for no other reason than that I just don't feel like it. If you ever want to make a fishing game, consider ripping this off. I think it would work out well for you. I'm also gonna rule out fishing systems that are way too simple. Yakuza's river fishing is a good example of this. You just wait for the bobber to move and then press X to catch. The fish you get is influenced by bait, location, and time of day. Even simpler is old-school RuneScape, where you don't even have to pay attention. It's fine for an MMO, but that's not what I'm making. Mechanics like this just don't hold up as the main gameplay. A common approach to fishing is to have some kind of tension bar. If it reaches the top, the line snaps and the fish escapes, and if it reaches the bottom, the fish, also escapes for some reason. Examples of this can be found in Sonic Adventure, Yakuza's Sea Fishing, and about a million other games. In my opinion, this would get tedious to do over and over again as a main gameplay mechanic. This is a game about catching fish. Asking you to redo the world's simplest Mario Party minigame for the 200th time does not cut it. The big elephant in the room is of course Legend of the River King, a series of fishing RPGs that I'm pretty much shamelessly ripping off. Those games use a hidden line tension mechanic, where you're just looking at what the fish does and reacting rather than having an actual meter. They also have a turn-based combat system for fighting animals on land, which is completely insane. I'm avoiding any sort of turn-based RPG mechanics, because balancing the numbers in a way that's fun would be way too much work. Ultimately, my main inspiration comes from a game which doesn't have any fishing at all, and that's Dokapon Kingdom. Dokapon is a series of RPG party game hybrids, where the combat is a very simplified one-turn command system. You can attack, but if your enemy defends it won't do much damage. You can strike for more damage, but if the enemy counters, you'll take the hit instead. You can use magic, but there are a number of different magic defense type abilities that can block or even reflect some of the damage. Fights in Dokapon Kingdom are a mind game based on picking the action you think your opponent won't counter, sort of like rock, paper, scissors. It's fitting, then, that literal rock, paper, scissors is used for robbing shops and attacking towns. What inspires me about Dokapon's combat system is its simplicity, despite it being the central mechanic of the game. There's basically no depth to the combat, even though you'll do hundreds of fights, but somehow it just works. I can imagine a version of the game where every random encounter launches you into a 2-minute-long turn-based battle, and I think I would get sick of it very fast. What I want for my game is a fishing system that's quick and simple, but not too boring or too thin. In Lakeside, I'm going to be taking a rock, paper, scissors approach to fishing, rethemed to make it more fishy. In its simplest form, players will select an action, the fish being caught will do the same, and the outcome of that will determine if the fish gets caught or not. That's only one part of it though. Let me walk you through the process of catching a fish. First, the player shows up to some water with a rod, bait, and a lucky charm. The fishing rod determines which water tiles can be fished on. Different rods will have different ranges, as well as the ability to fish on different types of water tiles. Bait affects which type of fish can be caught on that tile, since some fish will only appear if you're using a certain type of bait. Charm can have a number of effects on the battle, such as removing the chance of catching nothing, influencing which action the fish selects, or increasing the size of the caught fish. Next, the player selects a water tile to fish on and casts out their line. Every water tile has its own table of fish that can be caught, which is what we spent the entire last video ensuring. After a delay, a random fish from the table is selected to be caught. Each fish in the table has a frequency function, which is a Lua function that returns a value from 1 to 100 representing that fish's chance of being rolled. The reason why this has to be a function instead of just a flat number is so that the odds can be influenced by what's happening in the game. If you use the wrong type of bait, for example, the frequency function can return a 0, meaning that the fish will never appear. If the sum of the frequency function results is less than 100, the difference is the chance of no fish being caught at all. To decide which fish will be rolled for catching, a random number from 1 to 100 is rolled, and wherever it lands is the fish to catch. When the delay is over, an alert will appear, and the player will react to begin the process of catching the fish. On its face, the catch itself is a straight 50-50 chance. It's rock, paper, scissors, where ties result in a replay. However, this is where the catch function comes in, another Lua function attached to each fish that determines what action the fish will play. This function takes the player's choice as input, so some fish will read your inputs and prove impossible to catch until you've reached a certain point in the plot, or will always get caught if you have a certain lucky charm equipped. I want each fish to have its own unique behavior that the player will have to learn through the story and through experimentation. If all goes well, you'll successfully catch the fish, and it'll be added to your collection until you decide to sell it or give it to an NPC. And that's it! I've just explained fishing in the most detailed way possible. If it sounds too complicated, don't worry about it. Most of these things should come intuitively to the player. The mechanics of how things work will stay hidden, and all you'll know is that different rods are needed to fish in different places. The fish you catch depends on where you're fishing and what bait you're using, and if you can't figure out how to catch a certain fish, try asking around town. This is meant to be an adventure game, so characters around town will offer a lot of insight into the specific requirements for catching something. I think this system should strike a good balance between simplicity, detail, and integration with the RPG adventure aspect of the game. Okay, so now it's time to implement all that. Fishing rods were already done before I started making these videos, and in the last video I made it possible to assign fish to tiles, so now we have to work on the catching minigame. The first step is to make a mock-up of how I want the minigame to look. In the last video, I showed a basic MS Paint sketch of the fish editor, but this time I wanted to make something a lot closer to the final product. The fish editor wasn't meant to look any particular way visually, so it was fine as a sketch, but this game needs to look good, so I'd rather figure things out in an image editor where it's more easy to move things around. Making changes will be a lot harder once everything's been committed to code. The idea here is that you select your action in the top left, while the fish selects his in the top right. The fish card will be cycling rapidly and essentially would be impossible to see or predict, which allows me to set it to whatever I want without raising suspicion. In my head, your character portrait is done in a sort of 90s anime style, but I can't actually draw that, so for now I just put this guy here. About the fish portrait, by the way, it's an outline of the fish you're going to catch. I like the idea of having some clue as to what you've got on the line and if it's something you recognize or not. I see two ways to implement this. Option 1 is to write a shader that recolors all the pixels in the fish to gray. This is the correct way to do it, and it would be an easy shader to write, but I haven't used any shaders yet, and reworking my rendering pipeline to support them would be a giant pain in the ass. So I'm going to go with option 2, which is to just keep a second texture with shadow versions of all the fish. This means whenever I draw a new fish or update an old one, I have to remember to also add it to the shadow texture. The minigame came together easily enough, but I ran into a million minor bugs along the way. First, the bobber refused to draw on the correct tile. This was because past Tapioca decided that for some reason, entities like the player shouldn't have access to camera space coordinates in their drawing code. Then the fish shadow was drawing in the wrong place because I used tile width in my code instead of tile size, which is stupid, and those variable names should be more clear. Then the fish card was too fast. Then I had misaligned something in the sprite sheet so the card was bouncing around like this as it changed. Then I wanted to add a fish table to demonstrate the minigame working, but I noticed the table menu crashes if you back out without selecting anything. Finally, I couldn't crack this bug where the game says I won, even though I clearly didn't. This could be the display being wrong, or the code that determines the winner being wrong, or some kind of timing issue maybe. It turns out the problem is the catch function, which is so simple that I had all but ruled it out as the problem. Despite being only one line of code, it's still wrong in multiple ways. Firstly, the floor is totally unnecessary because math.random returns integers. Secondly, Lua's random function has an inclusive upper bound, so this can return a 3, which isn't a real action and totally breaks everything. I was ready to rant about how much I hate Lua for this, but some other languages also do this as it turns out, so I guess it's fine. Alright, I think I nailed down all the bugs. I think this is finally working okay. We can walk up to the water, open up the fishing rod, pick a spot to fish in. Draws that okay, wait a couple seconds. I think I have this set to just 5 right now. We get the alert, we press the button, it brings this whole thing up. I'm going against a wormfish because I set this to a table that only has the wormfish in it, and I happen to know that the wormfish catch function is the RNG one that I was just showing a second ago, so I guess I'll just pick an action randomly and we'll hope that I win. I'll go with reel. Nope, okay. Draws work, we just keep going. Reel again. I'm team reel, dude. I'm not swapping off this. This is RNG. Okay, there. This is RNG, I swear. We caught him. Okay, finally. Okay, so obviously this is the no-riz version of the minigame, to borrow a term from Zoomers. The main problem is the complete lack of animations, but I think an underrated bad aspect is that the text box telling you the outcome is completely blocking the cards. On the gameplay side of things, I still haven't implemented Lucky Charms, fish having sizes, or the inventory to put your fish in once it's caught, so there's still a lot of work to do. That's gonna have to be it for this episode though. This was a very explaining-heavy episode with not a lot of actual work, but the game has gone from being a fishing game with no fishing to being a fishing game with fishing, which I think is an improvement. In the next episode, I'm going to finish the last few missing gameplay elements I mentioned just a second ago, and also work on about 100 other little things. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.